Always makes me smile. So, Adam, thank you so much for making time to chat with me, because I'm going to
No
glean
worries.
some good information from you about which would be really useful for my PhD studies and my work. But my first question is why is a sound recordist at Massey University in New Zealand?
Um, yeah, so I worked freelance as a sound recordist for probably 25 years, we'll say, um, doing mainly sort of factual, documentary work, TV magazine type stuff, corporate. I live in Wellington, New Zealand, which is the capital city, so there's a lot of government work, government corporate work. Um, the other side of what I did a lot of was mixing audio and assisting in audio and engineering work for live broadcast. So a mixture of work for local broadcasters here, mixing TV. Um, Good chunk of work working for international broadcasters who are coming here mainly for sports type events, and a bit of international work traveling overseas working. Um, Also, quite a bit of sort of engineering work, electronics work, system design. Kind of in my accounting software, it comes up as special projects.
So
That's probably
quite a broad
yeah,
range of skills,
yeah, yeah,
basically. And how did that lead? How did
yeah.
that lead to you being at the university?
Um, I kind of decided it was time for a change. Um, I had actually worked for the university in the past. I'd worked for them in the late 90s, doing a similar-ish job, but in a slightly different area. Um, I got to a point with the sound work where the people I was working with were mainly from other cities. Um, the live TV work was generally in other cities, other countries, um, and kind of got a little bit over it. Um, the location sound work, the actual job itself, the mechanics of it, I wasn't finding that exciting anymore. I really enjoyed the talking to people before and after it, being in the car and traveling around, lunch, uh, meeting some really interesting people as part of it. But the challenge of actually recording sound and kind of wasn't really doing it for me anymore.
So you're
Um,
ready for a new challenge?
Ready for a change. And at
Mm.
the same time, kids were getting older. I think at that point, my eldest was just hitting secondary school, so 12, 13. Um, and it was kind of becoming more apparent that actually being around on the weekends was more important. Um, and that was the thing with the live broadcast work. It was generally it was a Saturday. Um, yeah, you're away for pretty much a whole weekend. Yeah, I really enjoyed. Yeah, the opportunity came up at Massey, and I think it was a day. It was a particularly quiet day that I got called. I was doing a job for I can't remember who it was for, but we were out at Park Road Post, which is Peter Jackson's facility, to interview. It might have been Peter, it might have been someone else, but essentially spent about 6 hours lying on a couch waiting, and got a call from a friend of mine going, "Hey, we're looking for someone." Why not? It sounds like
Rather than being kept waiting by possibly Peter Jackson himself.
I want to say it was Peter, but I can't honestly remember who it was out there. You get so many projects, and generally when there's something big going on, they're rushing the heads department around, and you're just waiting for that time to get that 3 words in, and yeah.
And the work that you were doing before you came to the university, what percentage of that was for visual TV, to get sound to go with visuals, and what percentage was, say, radio, podcast, audio in its own right?
It would have been predominantly sound for screen.
Yeah.
Um, there would have been a small amount of little project works, working with artists, working with people trying to do often podcast stuff, little the stuff that wasn't directly for screen would have been probably predominantly unfunded work. A little bit of recording effects for games, that sort of thing, although that's technically screen. Um,
And
yeah.
is there much, like, what is the scene for radio podcasts in New Zealand right now? I mean, here in the UK, we predominantly rely for certain, and particularly in relation to audio drama, we have a certain amount to the BBC, which they've drastically cut, and there's more coming through as podcasts. I believe that the demand for audio drama exceeds what's actually being produced because there's not enough money around at the moment to invest in it. So what's the setup there in New Zealand?
It's growing. I don't know a mess. I'm probably not the person to ask for stats on it, but what it would have been in the past would have been Radio New Zealand, which is our state radio broadcaster, producing stories and series for radio. We've seen in the last, say, 5 years, a lot of that becoming podcast as opposed to radio. They do a certain amount of radio drama as well, not massive. But we're also seeing a lot of the media organisations who are, they've moved from being newspapers into online entities doing podcasts. And podcasts it was really interesting. I was at the NAB conference last year in the States, and as part of that went to the BEA conference, the Broadcast Education Association. A lot of academics from universities raving about podcasts and teaching podcasts. They're all people from traditionally radio backgrounds. They've been teaching radio for 20 years and realise that students don't want to learn about radio anymore, but they'll learn about podcasts.
And what's the work that you're doing at the university?
All right, I'm the Technical Services Operations Coordinator for the School of Music and Creative Media Production, which is far too many words for a job title. What that actually means varies, probably almost day to day. Essentially, I coordinate a team of, I'm going to say 8 technical staff who work across both music and screen arts. We've got a music program, commercial music, which is more emphasised towards being how to make a living out of being a musician, as opposed to how to be a master at playing a particular instrument. I have an analogy for that, but we're recording it, so I'm not going to give it. It involves a triangle. And then the screen arts program, which is predominantly film, but it's film. You can major film, game, animation, VFX, immersive media, and media technologies. Probably about 70% of our students are game students, though.
And yes, which makes sense. And I've been hearing that there is an attitude for students who they want to make visual TV, movies, and that there isn't a huge demand or respect really for the audio medium, even though I think the audience, especially amongst the younger generation, for podcasts is actually rising, but there doesn't seem to have been a transition yet from that, with people wanting to actually learn about it. Do you find that, or are people there more kind of, the students more open to audio as much as the visual arts?
I'm not sure where that would sit. I mean, they're definitely, you get the students who want to be cinematographers or they want to be directors. Very few of them come in saying, I want to be a sound recordist. And I think a lot of programs, and ours is probably one of those, find it easier to deliver visual content than sound. We have a very strong sound program within music, within our studio, music studios. It could be better within screen arts. Having said that, sitting there with academics beginning of the year, this year, and I think every one of the major coordinators mentioned talking about audio within their field. It's game, VFX, animation. Yeah, it's interesting. Our factual production, factual was the other one I missed actually,
Yeah.
which is effectively documentary, but we broaden it slightly. Our first years are actually doing podcasts. I'm probably working with some summer school students next week. They're running around with Zoom recorders, recording bits and pieces. Yeah, it's a great podcast. Is a great medium. It's a great wrapper for lots of other things, really.
Well, there's technically it doesn't cost that much to comparatively to create an audio drama compared to a short film. I'm currently just on a budget for a half-hour audio play, and it's thousands of pounds less than if I was making it as a short film, which it originally was before I adapted it. So the work that I've been doing with exploring using the use of binaural, it's been really interesting talking to a lot of academics. Have been really excited about the prospect of this sort of new grammar for audio, because it is very different. To be blunt, it's a pain in the arse compared to just doing standard stereo. It's a steep learning curve of what you can and can't do to get something that's broadcastable. However, from a creative point of view, I'm very excited about the idea of putting the audience inside the drama and increasing the emotional connection that they have with the story and the characters. And it's just working out how to do that. And there's no playbook. That is kind of sort of creating it as we go along. I wondered if you had any thoughts or experience working in binaural or ambisonic, as we'll probably record it in ambisonic, to give us a little bit more leeway if the actors turn their heads a little bit too much, and then take it down to binaural. So because most the audience are going to be listening to it on their headphones.
For sure.
So have you got any thoughts or experiences in that area?
Yeah, I've done. I did some early stuff with binaural where I think I was working on a TV series. Probably one of the first things I worked on that was profiling artists, and we'd do the odd thing on musicians, and I had no stereo mic at that point and wanted to just add some stereo content to it, in which case recording binaural in a very dodgy way. I was using two lapel mics stuck to the side of the foam that comes out of the inside, the lid of a Pelican case. I wrapped that in a circle, so it's size of a head, bit of tape around it, a couple of lapel mics on the side, and stuck that on the end of the pole. It's fantastic, sounded great. The musicians loved it. They sort of sitting and listening to it afterwards, but it doesn't translate to speakers well.
No, it's for the headphones, isn't it? Really, and it certainly doesn't translate well coming out of a radio in your car.
No. But mixing, if you did even if you did a mono recording, and then mixing those binaural tracks into that to just give a little bit of space to it, it creates a little bit of interest on headphones as opposed to just that straight up the front mono.
And I think. Just because this is the time, if you like, it's only fairly recently that most people have headphones, mainly because they're gamers, and people are used to. I think the pandemic increased the number of people who are listening to online audio, and I one of the things I'm interested with talking to sound recordists and mixers who work with binaural is actually a lot of them have been quite negative. I mean, it's great for you to hear you say that it sounds fantastic, because I've had many who've kind of don't seem to think it's worth the hassle because of all the tricky things around it.
It's hard, and you get the same with ambisonic. If you're recording, say we're recording sound effects, great to go out and record Atmos in 5.1 recording, but the moment you start to go, I want a bit of that, and I want to layer something else in there and layer something else in there, your noise floor just comes up, and you'll get the same thing with binaural. I guess you need to decide whether you can either record as a binaural, which is great if you can control the people in the space and not have to do much post-production to it. Your other option is just do mono recordings and then place them in a space and do a binaural fold down of that.
But my question is, do you get the same effect? So, for example, you can get really good quality stuff in a studio, but it never sounds like you're outside. So, to get that kind of authenticity where the audience are suspending belief for the story, but they're not having to go, oh, I know they're in a studio, but I'll pretend they're outside for now, which really annoys me. I don't like that because I'm used to films and TV where there is a bit more sort of reality, if you like. Do you think that you can get the same effect by having lots of mono and doing it in post compared to the actual recording live?
I don't think you do, and it's the same as using an ambisonic mic as well. I think, as opposed to a binaural mic, you don't get the mass of a human head.
And that's really useful to have this conversation now. So I've kind of been persuaded by someone who's worked with binaural and mixes and so award-winning sound designer, and they said you get around the problem with ambisonic of having extra microphones on there if you want to, in case they've only got to move their heads a little bit too much to the side, the actors, and you really notice it, and that sort of made sense. So how is it that with the ambisonic, I'm using a nice, very affordable Zoom H3 VR, which obviously can't move. It makes such a noise. Just to explain, this is a very different way of working, which I'm finding interesting. So the microphone is a bit like it's there, and the actors perform and are blocked around that microphone, and they play out long whole scenes because of the muddy backgrounds. If you don't want to cut too many times, you want them to, which is great for performance, but you don't want to we'll just pick up here. If they make a mistake, we'll pretty much be going back to the beginning of the scene, because the chances are the backgrounds won't match when you pick it up later. And so I'm trying to turn the negative side into a positive, because it does make the whole performance side great. It's more like a theatrical performance. And so all of that's great. And obviously keeping effects, trying to do as much in sync as possible on the day, so we're not layering in another layer, and keeping it as authentic and natural as possible, and accepting that it's not going to be as clean and pristine maybe as your average BBC play for today, but it'll have much more of a sort of immersive effect. So how would recording that in ambisonic on the same mic and then mixing down to binaural be different? Does ambisonic work in a different way to binaural when the way it's recorded on a mic like that, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the as you know, a binaural ambisonic mic is this array of microphones, and then you throw a whole lot of really clever maths at it, and you can turn it into a mono omni, you can turn it into a cardioid, you can turn it into 5.1, you can turn it into binaural. A binaural mic works by having two mics separated and to get stereo, you've got both the difference in level between the two. So if something's way off here, it's going to be louder on this mic than this mic. You've got the delay. So there's multiple ways of recording stereo. You can do it with two mics pointing each way, or you can have them spaced. So you get, the sound hits this one first before this one, and the human, we don't go, oh, that was faster than that one, but we know, our brain knows. And then you've got the sheer mass of a head in between that. So that adjusts, if you think about just two spaced microphones, the frequency response, the actual sound picked up on both of them is going to be pretty much the same. Whereas a binaural, you've got the head in the way. Mm-hmm. So that's going to change the actual frequency response of this mic versus this one, or it's going to pick up different frequencies. And then you've got the fake ear cavity. So we hear, your earlobe has an effect on the sound as well. So it's going to sound different from behind than it is in front. So all those factors then come into it.
So those in the Zoom H3, as far as I understand, that it's sort of replicating that effect without you actually having a head, and it's violently less expensive. So it's probably not going to be as perfect. Whether or not the audience would notice the difference, I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to understand, that with a mic like that with the ambisonic, having the extra microphones around, does that not give you that same sense of someone approaching, someone moving around you, behind, coming close into one ear or the other? If we record it on ambisonic and mix down to binaural, will we lose some of that?
I think you would lose some of that. Whether you're losing enough of that to make it worthwhile is the thing. I mean, you've talked about the advantage of ambisonic is you can then go, something went wrong, I can just turn that into a mono omni, and they're all standing around a mono omni mic, and then I can mix in some binaural Atmos into that, or ambisonic Atmos. You can turn that into a cardioid that's pointing at that particular character and get that character. So you've got the ability to, it's Command Z, it's undo. You've got the ability to turn it back into something else as opposed to committing. And I think that's life, isn't it?
Which gives me it gives me a sense of security to know that we could do that. But having said that, I don't. I think what we're going to do is actually is really test the two. There's some particular movements in scenes where actors are moving around in a particular way that we're going to test in both ways and just see if we can see the difference. Because if we lose too much with the ambisonic, we're just going to do the binaural. But I know that you've got the actors there for a couple of days and we're outdoors, so there's a lot of other things that go wrong. So it's finding that balance. But it's interesting that you say that you wouldn't be quite the same, and I'm just really interested in that, because I think it's an area that a lot of people just don't really know that much. They haven't played around with it the way you have.
Yeah, and I think it's probably just one of those. It's like when we went from film to shooting digital. People went, it's great, I can do all this, and you go, yeah, it's not the same. It's an argument I feel embarrassed to make, but it's probably almost the CD versus vinyl.
Yes, I think, and I was in one of my interviews, the sound recordist designer was saying that binaurals, it's a bit like 1970s film, and I'm thinking, yes. Sometimes you want that effect. They shot, was it True Detective on 35mm because they wanted a particular effect, even though you wouldn't do that on 4K, 5, 6, 7K or something video. So you got to think of what's right for which production. And it's it's not a factory where you want everything to come out looking and sounding the same. Do you feel that experimenting with these sort of this more creative approach, shall we say, to working with it? So for me, I like the fact that you mentioned vinyl. I mean, it's just something tangible about binaural that isn't very scientific at all. And for anyone who's listening to this and doesn't know what binaural is, essentially, my best way of explaining it is that when you listen to stereo, it's inside your head. When you listen to binaural, you are inside the drama and it's happening around you. And I think the gamers who are used to sort of ambisonic and surround sound are much more used to that. So now is a good time to think about using it more, and just finding a sort of grammar for it, a way that it to be able to decide, actually, this project, it would work well with that, the same way you might decide whether you're going to shoot something in 5K, 6K, or 35mm or 16mm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a good description of binaural. It's effectively recording something the way that we hear. Um, it's interesting when I first started playing with it, and you go and give the headphones to someone and go, "Listen to this. This is awesome," and they'd listen to it and go, "Cool, it's great." And then you turn the headphones down, and they go, "Oh, actually, I was." It, they didn't know they were listening to something. They just thought they were hearing. They
Ah,
just thought they were hearing the world. It wasn't until
yeah.
you killed it that they suddenly realised that you had actually created something that actually just sounded real.
That's really interesting.
Um,
I mean,
yeah.
there's the fun thing, the idea that you hear a knocking and you think someone is literally knocking on the door, and there's all
Mm.
those kind of tricksy sides of it. But it's that connection to what's happening, which I think is really interesting. Do you think it has a future apart from people like me playing around with it to use in drama?
I think so. I've been thinking about it recently, and we're we're making films. We've been making films and TV for screens and for theatres. We have to make it for people who have this fantastic 5.1 setup at home, um, but it also has to sound good off my laptop and off the shitty TV speakers that we have. Um, and as you were saying before, more and more people are using headphones now. So the way around that is you could take that 5.1 and try to do a binaural fold down of that. Um, or what about doing your normal 5.1 or you're doing your stereo mix and then also incorporating within that some binaural content? So if you just got a few elements in there that are recorded with binaural, is that enough to make it sound like a binaural or sound like a more immersive mix without colouring the speaker mix, the 5.1, the stereo mix?
I
So just
guess
sneaking little, yeah.
I guess the difference is though is talking about whether. So for me, when I watch a movie, whether it's on a phone or, God forbid, or a big screen, I'm not. Yeah, I want surround sound, and if I'm having to listen to my headphones, I want it to sound good, but I'm not necessarily expecting full immersive binaural experience, because if you've got surround sound, I guess would you say that surround sound uh, is normally mixed down to just stereo when it could be mixed down to binaural for like watching a movie, or would that be like just too much with the visuals? Because it's quite tiring listening to binaural
Yep,
because you
yep.
really listen. So yeah, I'm keeping episodes of things I'm writing for that to half an hour. When they did the National Theatre, they did Anna the play. They kept it to an hour because the audience were behind a soundproof screen. They could only hear it through earphones. It's a different experience. You kind of have to work a little bit harder. Because you're part of what's happening. So it's not the same as just having stereo.
Yeah. Um, I think you would be, I don't think it would be as simple as just hitting a button and creating a fold down of it. I think you'd have to put a little bit more into that. Um, I think it would translate quite easily. And we have, so there's a few companies making plugins for both for immersive production and for design for mixing on headphones. So you put in your plugin, you put it on the mix bus, you say, I'm using these headphones. I want it to sound like Abbey Road. And
Wow.
suddenly there's some whole lot of fancy maths going on and modeling, and it sounds like you're sitting in that control room. So it wouldn't be a far stretch from that to go, cool, I'm sitting in this 5.1 space listening to this on headphones, create the mix. And it'll probably sound great. It'll be awesome. Um, but whether you want to add more to that to it, I don't know. Yeah, yeah, I'm not
And
sure. Yeah,
with the whole uh, post doing it in post side of things, I've listened to as a couple of very good. They all seem to be around vampire dramas. One's on I think it's Audible, and another on by an independent company, and they're great productions and really well done. And they use binaural, and it's great. One of them definitely sounds like it's in a studio. It does not sound like they're in a great big hangar side of big building at all, which I think is a shame. And the other issue I have is that I don't know yet, because I need to try and track down the sound designers and the producers who made that and say, did you record binaurally, or did you just do it all in post? It has certain amount of effects to it, but I don't feel like I'm in those dramas at all. When I listen to Almost Tangible's Macbeth, it's a bit like you're in the room or in the castle or in the field, because they are in a castle and they are totally doing it in quite, and it's got all those messy backgrounds and so much going on, but it's a real tangible experience. What are your thoughts as a sound recordist? So part of your job is things to be technically clean and transmittable. How do you align that with there is a certain sort of messiness about binaural?
I think probably the one of the things that's, as a sound recordist, you're trying to get things perfect and you want this quiet thing, but the most important thing that you're doing is that story. And when you're sitting there doing a documentary on someone who's been through who knows what, you don't just say, can we just stop for a minute for that plane? Can you just,
No.
That's the story. And you're doing something. You're interviewing someone on the street, or a presenter doing something, and you actually need to move on. You can't wait, and you go, cool. There's a fire engine. We can see the fire engine. It's all good. Or we can see this traffic. It's okay to hear traffic. So I think taking that philosophy of you're going to be taking a little bit of a technical hit, but that feeling you're creating with ambisonics or with binaural could be worth it, and the performance of the actors is worth it.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing actually. So the performance side for the actors, how does recording binaurally affect them?
What I learnt from the producer and director of Almost Tangible's Macbeth was, and which really caught my imagination actually, is that they found they were doing these long takes, and of course Macbeth they were using theatre actors anyway, and they would have they would come in through the big doors, they walk up past the mic, they go up the stairs, and you'd have that sense of movement, and it was because you didn't want to stop and pick up from that last line because the bloody backgrounds would be different, but actually it was very beneficial for the performers, because they were able to play a whole scene instead of stop start, which often is the case. And I'm interested in it as a writer, because I have been told by a director of a binaural production, oh, don't worry, you just write what you write and leave it to the director. But I don't agree with that, because as a writer I have to think, I'm not going to write something that's got lots of chopping around and if within the same. I want to write things that are going to be practical to create within that medium and be aware of the issues. And maybe that's right or wrong, but I just feel that it's really quite refreshing to think, well, I can have we can let this scene really go on as long as it's working dramatically, but it really allows the actors more flow. And the director's job, who's never worked in binaural at all, what the sound recordist and I are doing is we're kind of rehearsing some particular moves, if you like. So I see it as the equivalent of being a DOP. So instead we're a director of sound rather than a director of photography. Yep. And we're looking at certain ways a particular scene can be played out, and saying, right, in that scene, one character's down there, another's standing over them. So how far away from the mic? What's the positioning they need to be from that Zoom HL3 to get that sense of distance. And if they're moving around, around the front of the mic, not very good, but from the sides and the back, so literally blocking out particular moves that then the director can work with the actors. But we've already worked out that if we do it from this position and this position, it'll sound good, because you don't want to be messing about on the day, and rehearse those and have those little set bits of choreography, in fact, ready. And a lot of it's using that sense of space coming forwards and backwards, the gentle moving around, the coming close and away, because they can be very effective at specific points in the drama to emotionally manipulate, shall we say, the audience, which is at the end of the day what you want to do with a drama. So I'm finding it very, very interesting. And as a writer, I'm no interest in being a director, but I've had to put that hat on to a certain extent with the sound recordist to try and work out what would be some great suggestions to make to the director about what they can do with it, and they can listen to the tests and then take it from there.
Yeah. Actually, something that occurred to me is costume.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you were doing a period drama where characters were wearing giant frilly dresses. You've got that actor in a track pants and a t-shirt. They're not going to sound the same.
No, and when they did rehearsals for Anna, they had to always be in costume, and what was interesting, and that was different, obviously, because the audience could see, say, a present being taken out of a bag, but what they could hear, because they're used to films and TV, it didn't actually, even though it was real, it didn't sound like a present being taken out of a bag. So they had to get the right rustle and the right sound of a glass going on the table. So we obviously, in an audio production, the audience are having to make up their own images, but we've still got to give them sounds that sound real to them, irrespective of whether it's real or not. And as you say, that the clothing of the actors' footsteps, I mean, we're probably in a field for most of ours, but if you're inside and someone's got stilettos on, you're just going to hear clop, 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 clop.
Yep.
So it creates, like I said, it's a pain in the arse. It causes all kinds of problems and a lot of time, and it's certainly not a quick, cheap audio solution to shooting a drama. You have to put a lot of time and effort into it.
It's probably a lot closer to, and I'm trying to think of what the show was.
Because you've recorded plays, haven't you, on a stage, and that must have some issues that what people are used to hearing in the audience, and then when you're trying to record it to go on screen, there must be all kinds of annoying sounds appearing.
And I haven't done it where we're presenting in some low budget stuff where we've been presenting the whole context of the play. Often it's been shooting it as part of something else, part of a story for something. But yeah, you've got the challenges of mic placement. So you can't get microphones in very close. You can't boom someone on a stage. You want to hear the audience. On a large production, people tend to be mic'd up, in which case you can get a desk feed and you just get it. You deal with it later. You can turn it into whatever you like. On a smaller budget thing in a small space, that becomes a lot more challenging, in which case you do hear the room. You're really placing microphones around the place to try and do things. I'm always a little bit reluctant to throw radio mics on actors for stage shows, because it's become something extra they're not normally doing, and really that's going to affect them. And
and they don't always sound that great either, do they?
No, and then it turns to crap, and you've got 2 hours of a crappy mic. You can't really stop it and go, hey, can we go again? But I guess we're kind of we're almost, by going to binaural and going, it's all got to be done in one take, we're kind of getting back into that one take film idea.
Yeah.
Or the idea of, we've had a few stage shows that have actually been turned into multi-camera live events. I'm struggling with the names right now, but they've done it. I'm terrible with names. It's shocking. So it's kind of getting more into that, where they're playing in sound effects live as opposed to doing things later.
And I've noticed more. I've noticed more on television shows, certain shows. You just think, oh my god, they haven't cut for about 5-10 minutes. They're just moving through, and it is very effective. And I think to have I think but it is harder to do. The one of the challenges I think with the whole binaural side of things is this having to really rehearse and block and prepare, but also it's a positive thing, because I think I'm hoping that it's something the director and the actors really enjoy. And the other thing is to do everything in sequence. Is it Ken Loach always used to shoot things in sequence, which was great. It's great for the actors, because if they're going to building up to an emotional scene, they're not trying to do that right at the beginning. They get the build up. But if the weather changes or the background changes, we don't want that happening at odd times. So by doing it in a chronological order of the script, then it means that if the weather does change, it doesn't it doesn't create huge problems. Though I have to ask you the question that I'm asking all sound recordists. This is my nightmare that keeps me up at night. It starts to rain. So we can have it set out in a walled garden, so that having a gazebo would be perfectly acceptable. And I've been told if you put blankets on the top, it won't make quite such a horrendous sound. Is that true? Was there anything else we can do? Because it's England, so it's bound to rain.
Sounds like what? Similar problems here. I mean, rain, it's down to budget. And even big studios, often sound is a secondary thing. And if we're hearing, if you go over to Miramar, where Peter Jackson Studios are, they're in the flight path for the airport. That's it. Blankets are good. Done that. The foam, I think we used to call it hog's hair, but basically the foam stuff that comes out is used for air conditioning filters. It's really good. It's a open foam, and the water just dissipates through it.
Oh wow,
Eventually
that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And you don't get that sound,
Yeah, and unlike blankets, the cool, because it's open cell, the water's actually going to go through it and then eventually hit the roof and then drain off. Whereas blankets on the roof is going to get soggy and it's going to get heavy. So you kind of want to watch what you put that on, and eventually it's just going to get saturated, and you're just going to hear splashing of water on blanket.
So it's the air conditioning. Was it called hog's hair?
I think we call it hog's hair. Yeah. It's probably not even a New Zealand thing. It's just used for the filters. Get a good thick chunk of that and layer that over it, and that's a good problem. Yeah.
Thank you. You could have saved our production now.
Maybe, yeah. But at the end of the day, you've got to accept that it's raining, and you're going to have to include that in your thing. Yeah. And I guess that's the thing about what you're doing, is you're doing it binaurally, so you're making a compromise there. You're having to do it in one take. Yeah, but it's deciding whether the compromises involved with doing it, that process, recording binaurally, are worth the outcome. In the end.
And one of the other issues or challenges are the with the binaural is the we've got the, as you said, it's the carrying it on in one take, getting that fluidity, which I think could be actually quite beneficial. But ultimately, you mentioned that binaural is the way you hear, but it's not really, is it? Because our brains cut out the background for us. It edits it out. That doesn't happen in binaural. The binaural reminds you just how incredibly loud the world is, and it's like stuck on. And if you try and get rid of it, you mess up the quality of your sound. Are there any? Because you're not miking straight close to the mouth. You've got the mic there, and they're working around the mic, and that is probably the biggest issue that we're coming across, trying to find an outdoor space that's quiet enough. And have you got any tips on that? Because we've our composer's been looking at doing some of the music outside as well. That's really going for the whole binaural thing, and she's finding that when she tries to lower the background, it messes up the sound of the instruments. And is it just that we just should take it raw and native, or are there ways to tweak it that won't mess up the quality of our sound?
I haven't had a massive play with noise reduction within binaural. There's some fantastic plugins for getting rid of background sound, just isolating voices and doing that. But that's going to affect. It's back to what we were talking about earlier with the whole nature of binaural is you're hearing it the way you hear it, and the moment you start to mess with that, there's something wrong, and your brain knows there's something wrong. So I think
it's just that the actors are basically going to have to perform like they're on a stage with no microphones. Just really go for it and adjust to that experience, if you like, which could be great for performance.
Except on a stage they're performing forwards.
Yeah.
And you kind of want them performing towards the microphone.
Yeah.
Argument, someone turns away.
You've lost it.
You've kind of lost it.
Yeah.
But then, it'd be interesting to see actually discuss that with the actors and go, this is the problem, have a listen. How can you help?
I think that's a really good idea. I think with our tests that we do, we should do things that deliberately are not so good and just let them hear them in advance so they get a real sort of tangible feel for what we're trying to achieve and what can easily go wrong, and just really involve them in the process.
I think it's a great idea. I mean, a stage actor is used to performing towards the front of the stage. They're not going to sit there and face up stage and mumble.
No.
They're going to be pointing down, and they're going to be projecting. So they're used to adapting their performance to work within a situation. And it's the same with film. You'll get someone that's some shot, and they'll go, I'm just going to duck down a little bit during this part, and to help things along. So maybe the actors actually bring something and go, I can do that. I'm going to turn away, and it's actually what you want, because you want it to sound like they're turned away from you. But at the same time, I'm going to take a step backwards, bringing me closer to your microphone.
Yeah, it's a whole choreography that's involved to make it really work. And sorry.
I was just thinking of likening it to the sort of one take music recordings, even, or even an orchestra. Orchestras, we do mic up stuff, but actually we use a microphone, a decca-tree, which is it's an array of microphones sitting above the orchestra. They're spaced, and it gives you a sense of where the orchestra is, and we know that the loud things are at the back and the quiet things are at the front, and it's all shaped that way purely so the audience can hear it in the right way. We kind of do that. There's a great album, the Cowboy Junkies, the Trinity Sessions, which is, they were looking for a place to rehearse and record something. They ended up recording an album in an old church hall in the middle of nowhere, stereo mic straight to dat. And it sounds fantastic. You can hear the room. Guarantee they could have got a completely different mix if they'd done it in a studio, but it just sounds cool. It sounds really nice, and that's kind of where am I going? You're going to have to space things, and everyone's going to have to be on board for it. Yeah,
that whole choreography. But you brought up a point there. One argument I've had is that you can get fantastic results with stereo, so why bother with binaural? From your perspective, why would you think that there could be an advantage for some dramatic works to be using binaural rather than just stereo?
I think find anyone making films, music, even writing a book, immersive. you want to immerse someone in an environment, and this is a better tool for, it gives you a greater sense of immersion. Um, there's compromises. Yeah, we talked about before that you can't start layering things, stacking things up because the noise floor is going to come up. You probably could add, you could actually, I want this to sound, I've done this thing, but actually I need a train over here. And you could add the sound effect of a train and track it into an binaural immersive environment and add that. But eventually, if you do too much of that, it's going to start to sound a bit, someone's trying to fool me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's probably the other side of, because you're doing a PhD, it's research. Is how far can you push it? At what point? How are you handling? How are you talking to your audiences and going, is this actually working? Have I pulled it off? At what point do people know?
And you've just reminded me of something that I've discovered, and as has Sound Recordist. Because our brain knows what we're supposed to be hearing, we think it's working, that sense of someone's climbing a tree. But anyone else hears it and it's just some rustling, and they don't have any sense of, and unless they use dialogue carefully placed to frame the scene so the audience can create a visual picture so that then the sounds make sense. That's been I suppose that's true of any radio to a degree, but it's a shame to create an effect that actually nobody gets. And what we're finding is that one bit of advice we had was the sound recorders should go off and sit on their own in a car with the doors shut, with their eyes shut, to listen back, because what you're hearing during your brain's telling you what's happening, but actually it's not necessarily there on that sound at all. And that's been a real issue. I have to keep sending it off to people and say, what's happening? What could you hear? Because it's impossible for me, because I already know, to judge it.
Our brain tells the story, and we're giving the sound as cues for that story, I guess. So it's all fake, isn't it?
As we try to get an authentic sound.
It's all bollocks, we were talking before about our brains tune sounds out. I was listening and our brains, we hear change. If you give us the same, I was listening to a podcast. It was some sound designers talking about recording and mixing Atmos for films, which is often the one, you're making these great Atmos beds and then it's just being killed with music or explosions, you don't hear it. So there's a little bit of moaning about that. But you take something like just a nice room tone for a scene, for quite a long scene. If you play that one sound for a couple of minutes, it's going to disappear. People are going to just forget about it. So they're talking about getting maybe 4 different sounds and just doing long crossfades between them, so there's change. And that way our heads don't tune it out. We hear the change and things.
And we get that. Interestingly, with the Anna National Theatre production, they had binaural room atmoses as the character moved on the stage through rooms, and even off stage where the audience couldn't see it, they had like an actual sink in the bathroom, so you hear the running water, and a different room atmos for that. So that's the levels you go to, because it's, if you don't do these things, it starts to feel fake, but the audience doesn't know why.
It's going back to radio plays, isn't it? Live radio plays where you've got the 3 men in suits or lab coats banging coconut shells to pretend to be there. Except you've got to have them, you're going to be 10 metres over there and you're going to walk slowly in bare feet or in socks so I can't hear you.
Yeah.
While you bang your coconut shells.
Yeah, a friend of mine today said, I want to be involved. And I said, definitely there'll be things for you to do. So we all need extra hands, trying to do as much of it as we can live. Yeah, very like the old-fashioned, if you like, ways of doing things, and all in order. So yeah, it'll be an interesting experience, and I'm hoping at the end of it I still want to do more. That will be the test.
Yeah, it's funny if you're comparing it to the old radio plays. It's kind of this has all been done before, hasn't it? Yes, binaural's been around for years, and it's had this resurgence. It was the people sitting at the back of Grateful Dead concerts, recording the gig on their little 1/4-inch tape machines or their cassette recorders. It's kind of and the idea of the radio play where you're creating this thing constantly and you're playing in live sound effects and you're doing all that. We've done one-shot films where things have to be done on time. We do live where things has to happen. So it's like, I guess it's going to be like any other production, TV production, film production, radio production. It's pre-production.
Yeah.
That's the bit. It's all the pre-production that matters. It's the planning and the.
Yeah.
But you can see how you handle music and sound effects changes in Atmos. Like if you want to, I guess you don't want to write something where suddenly a cold wind blows in.
No. I'll tell you. What we've got as a string quartet playing in the garden. And working on that at the moment, and the composer has been experimenting with various electronically created versions, but it doesn't work. When you listen to a double bass played outside, you can feel it resonate in even in stereo. So it looks like we are going to have to use real musicians, but what we can do, because trying to get them there on the day, as it were, is quite difficult. So the workaround is we're going to experiment with recording them in a studio binaurally, so it's a clean background, and then at least we get some movement, and then see if that works to add in. But we both know it will work better if we can actually record them outside. So what we're looking to do is to record them in a studio, clean background, and then play them on a big speaker near the microphone live while the actors are doing their thing. And what they'll be recorded is the musicians playing at maybe 20 feet away, and there might be a little bit of movement, but that's all pre-recorded, but it's coming through the speaker into the microphone literally live whilst the actors are doing their lines. So that's what we're experimenting with now, and we feel that should work, the little tests that we've done. But again, it's about how far away from the mic, what speaker. There's a lot of sort of technical, practical stuff we need to nail down, the same way as your DOP knows to know which lens to use and what lights. It's the same sort of thing in a way.
And do you multi-track the quartet and actually have 4 speakers placed in the space?
Well, that would be cool.
Mix them,
but that might be going beyond what we can cope with on the day. I'm a risk-averse person, I've been told. I think my approach would be recording them in a studio. And I don't know whether you'd want to do it. And so if you do it in a recording studio has a sound to it. It's not a dead environment. No. We've got multiple studios here. Our big studio, which is designed to be able to get an orchestra into it, has and most of them do have I think a reverb time of, I want to say it's like 2.1 seconds or something. It's around that. It's the number that's randomly bumped in my head. So you hear that, and that will be, that adds character to it, and that's why people want to record in Abbey Road or want to record in wherever, because that's that sound. And so do you record it there? In which case, we talked about surround and binaural. When you start mixing some things together, the noise floor comes up, and you start to gets noisy. Yeah, is that sound of the room going to become noise? Yeah, and if you just mix it and affect that,
do you record them in a very dead, record them in binaural, microphone in the middle, but record them in a very dead environment, so you've got no reflections, you're just hearing the instruments, and then add binaural Atmos to that, or you've got binaural Atmos in your...
Or play them through a speaker whilst recording so it's got exactly the same background as the actor speaking, because it's coming out live. That's what we were going to experiment. What are your thoughts on that? How could we improve? What should we be testing?
I don't know. I mean, I think the workflow should be such that you can undo. You can go, cool, we've got that, but actually we've just created a really nice stereo recording, and we could just throw a binaural mic and a couple of speakers and record that. And play it, and mic up the instruments as well, and go, cool, we found some budget for some speakers, and maybe you don't have to go for your super flash speakers. You can go for something a little bit more cost effective that people don't mind you putting outside in the rain.
Yes,
but it's getting that authenticity in the environment as opposed to the perfect. I tell people, if you're not making compromises, you're not doing sound. It's just compromise. Yeah, it's compromises.
Well, I'll let you know how our tests go with our with our string quartet. I mean, the bit I refuse to do is have them in the rain playing live only because I don't know for people mad enough to want to do that on the very small budget that we have. So like you said, it's finding the compromises that work. The one compromise I refuse to make is to do it in a studio when it's actually set outside. And I'm surprised how many people have suggested that, as though it's the most obvious thing. But it's one of the reasons I hardly ever listen to radio, because I know they're not really outside, and it kills it for me. Maybe it's just me, but I just think that's a basic level of authenticity that we should at least achieve that, if nothing else.
Yeah, there's a sound designer who I've been racking my brain to try and remember what his name was. I'm terrible with names. He runs a Facebook group called Teaching Sound for Screen, or something like that. He's someone whose name I should remember. He's the sound design team for things like Apocalypse Now, and works at Skywalker. And there was a post he did a little while ago recording a radio plays and going, we're actually not doing it in the studio, we're doing it on location. And they've got someone there actually booming the actors and getting out into the environments to get that sense of authenticity, that performance. Someone walks through a door, they're using a door, walks through a door, tracks them in. But you do have that, you're baking in your sound effects, you're baking in your footsteps, your door.
Yeah.
There it is.
It's the...
and you're doing that maybe 10 times harder.
I think the thing is, what you don't want to end up is spending hours in post-production, like you said at the beginning. I think the key thing is you can't do it halfway. I think we are very much going to go for do as much as we can live and get that authentic sound. And as long as you can hear what they're saying, as long as people, it's not muffled, it's good enough quality to know what's going on. If a plane goes over, it gets to finish going over because you're letting the scene run. You're not chopping and changing like you might do if it was on a film. We're not going to go and redo the dialogues afterwards, because that's it. That's what we're recording. So I'm not saying there's not plenty of work for the sound designer mixer to do, but the idea is that he's going to be given the tracks laid pretty much as per recorded, and his job is just to tweak them around and make them as good as audible. Yes, exactly. So
it's kind of one of the
it is quite
job as a sound person, really.
Yeah, it is quite terrifying. Thank you so much for all your guidance, and I think you have possibly solved my nightmares over the rain now. I'll keep you up to date with some of our sound tests and how we do, because it'd be great to have your feedback on that.
I'd be really interested to hear. I think it's a fascinating way to do it. I think it's that I like the idea of doing something that has risks and you're making compromises on quality, well, not quality. You're making compromises in order to create something that
Yeah.
the listener falls into, and yeah,
It reminds me. I remember old enough to remember when video started being used instead of 16mm on TV, and how they added filters to mess up the picture to make it look more like film of the video, because
IMAX.
So technically it was messing it up, but to the human eye it just looked more real and more natural, and I think that's kind of what we're going for here, the equivalent. So from some people's point of view, it will be muddy and not as technically clean as it should be, but hopefully the audience will just enjoy it and be immersed in it and go with it.
We need that Atmos track. There's an editor here, Paul Sartorius, who I think it's fair to tell his story. It was told to me by someone else who told someone else. Cutting on film, editor, the director's going, that doesn't work. And super experienced drama editor knows the cut works.
Yeah.
Adds what he calls polar wind. I really hope this is actually him. It's a great story anyway. Which is actually him sitting at the microphone going,
yeah.
And having that through the cut makes the cut work. It's dirtying it up in order to sell something.
Yeah,
I think,
that's a really good example. And I think people are often not aware of how important the sound is to what they're watching, and for what I'm doing, it's really about how important the sound is for the images that the audience have got to make in their head. It's very much, they're not there to support images, they are to create images in the head of the listener, which is much more difficult actually than in many ways, but very, very exciting to be involved in.
Crazy idea, and I know we're trying to wrap up, but
that's all right.
It just occurred to me, you've got the challenge of recording actors in a space and you want to hear the distance, you want to hear that. It would be a hard experiment. Anechoic chamber.
Ooh.
Can you get into a largish anechoic chamber?
Is that those ones where you go and they put oxygen in for you?
No,
and it heals you. Is that a different one?
It's a barometric chamber. So an anechoic chamber is, and you find them in universities and research places, where it's a room. It'll be covered in foam all around the place. It's just completely dead, and there'll normally be like a mesh floor that you stand on to get in there and so there's absolutely no reflections. There's no sound coming in. It's a completely dead environment. Technically, you could record in that, and then you can add Atmos because you've got no other sound in there. The problem is those things are freaky to be in.
Yeah,
ears start to ring. You don't want to be in there too, which will affect performance. In which case, that would be the clinical way to do it.
It might be interesting to do with the musicians, to then play them through a speaker live outdoors when recording. But if you get, and this is what gets me with voices that done acting in the studio, even though it may have been done binaural, when they're supposed to be inside this great big building, and they aren't, because the voices sound completely different in whether they're in a big room so if they're completely dead and flat, how do you make them sound? You can put any atmoses and sound effects as you like, but the voice still sounds
you don't get the dead. Reflections off the walls and
that's
so
it.
You have to again, you're getting into fancy plugins and you're faking it, which is, as we've talked about, it's the fake stuff that we don't know what's happening, but we do kind of know something's wrong.
But it might be interesting to test out with the musicians for as a, well, no, I suppose, because it depends how, because if it comes out of a speaker sort of flat, as it were, not getting that, you want that, the double bass, you want to feel the vibrations, and you can get that through a YouTube video in normal stereo. So I'm hoping that, but you still got to start off with it. But if you think of something that could be done in that chamber, that could be used, but it's the timbre and the resonance of the sounds, whether it's an instrument or a voice, that is affected by the place that you're in. So even with stereo dramas, worth their salt, they are taking the character into a big old building or outside. They're not trying to do it all in a studio, because you just never get the same effect.
No, and that's why you don't record drums in a little dead room. You get a nice big space and you hear the drums kicking around. And it's compromise. Yeah.
Yes. Any further thoughts you have on it? Do let me know.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I guess I'm trying to think of an experiment you could do that you could apply to that.
Because I did test out doing some dialogue for a scene and effects in a studio, and then adding the binaural exterior wood sounds, and actually it was really effective. But I tested it on my daughter, actually, and she listened to that, and I'm thinking, God, wouldn't it be wonderful if this works? Which is so much easier. And then she listened to the version where the dialogue was actually done outside, and she said it sounds fine, but it's what was the word she used? It just sounds clinical. It sounds more clinical, and even they had the woodland sounds and the night sounds in the binaural atmos. You couldn't hide the fact that the voices clearly weren't actually there, and that's when I thought, well, I'll give up trying on this one. We're just gonna have to do it in a field, and that's it.
Will the listener know the backstory? Are they going to be aware of your process when they listen to it?
No, but I want them to. They've got half an hour to keep their attention, and I want them to be in that garden, in that space, outdoors. And partly because, when I hear something on most of the time on the radio, I know they're not really there, and it just kills it for me, as I said earlier. And I think it's a basic thing. And I know creators of audio drama are quite happy using stereo, wouldn't dream of using a studio, and unless it was that was the sound they were looking for. And it's just the it's getting that. It's not even an authenticity thing. It's you don't want to give the audience reasons to go, oh, they're not really there. And one of the and also it affects the storytelling. So what I'm hoping to do, if we can get the spacing right and get the sense of movement and distance with the microphone down to a T, then it means I don't need so much dialogue, which is an odd thing to say for radio. I don't have to set up or use dialogue to help people understand what's going on, because that's the other thing I hate about most radio shows. I want it to be sonic cinema, and I want to tell the story with sound, and the opening sequence is very, very much an audio piece. After that, there's lots of dialogue, lots happening, but the first one is partly there to help the audience realise that stop ironing, washing up. You definitely shouldn't be driving the car. Actually, have a warning on the front: do not drive cars or iron clothes whilst listening to this binaural audio production, and for them to go, oh right, I need to pay attention to this. This isn't something I can just watch listen to while I'm doing something else, because it isn't. And it literally, the idea is to have something that's like you turn off Netflix, you put on your headphones, and this is an alternative sort of sonic cinema experience. That's what we're aiming for.
Yeah, so you don't want to listen to it while you're on the train.
No.
Because...
No.
I mean, we get it all the time. You're listening to something and you hear a sound off over here and you go, especially if it's an immersive thing.
It'd be quite disorientating. And also you'll miss your stop.
Yeah.
Because you'll be so immersed.
You're just assuming the sound of the guy wielding the chainsaw is in the headphones. It's not really someone with a chainsaw over here coming here. Yeah.
And I think actually people will end up listening on the train or the bus, but they'll be going, I've got this amount of time, and I'm just gonna shut my eyes, almost like a meditative state, and they'll get used to the fact that those sounds are in their world. But if something horrendous could happen around them and they'll be oblivious. It's all happening inside the drama.
A lot of people listening on noise cancelling headphones, and it's going to suck them into that space. I guess it's that discipline, and I mean that whole the guy with the axe. You have to have discipline with the people involved, because you don't want stray sounds and just someone steps on something over there because what was that? Because we hear change, we hear difference as opposed to the constants.
It's a small tight crew. Everyone. But I'm hoping this works, because I want afterwards. I'm writing a 10 half-hour horror series. So this half-hour one-off is a kind of a test run, and I am hoping that I still want to use binaural for the horror, because I think it'll be particularly amazing for that. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Adam.
No worries. Thank you.
I'll definitely keep you up to date with progress.
Cool. All right. Thank you. Talk to you another time.
Thank you. Bye.